Good morning, everyone. It's very nice that you could all make it. A very warm welcome to this event on Feminist Just Transition at this year's NGO Forum of the Commission on the Status of Women. I'm going to start off by thanking our organizers, Gender CC, Life EV, Marjorie, and Unrist. I would like to thank the translators who have made it possible to stream this event in both Spanish and French. And of course, I would also really like to thank my colleagues here at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for helping organizing this event. Without you, it really wouldn't have been possible. So thank you very much. I'd also like to point out that we are recording this event to make it available to those who can't be here right now, just so that you are aware of that. So yeah, we're also actually really grateful today to this year's CSW priority theme, which is achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. That really sort of acknowledges that there's not only a gendered impact of climate change, but that the response to climate change will really need to be focused around gender equality. And today the focus is on one sort of crucial aspect of this, which is the feminist just transition. Now, in light, of course, of recent political events, the transition away from fossil fuels has sort of received really renewed energy and focus and urgency. So it's really fitting. It's a really fitting time to be discussing the issue of just transition, which, just as a brief reminder, is defined by the Climate Justice Alliance as a vision-led, unifying and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. Essentially meaning sort of how do we move from fossil fuels to regenerative energy in a just manner. And this is something which is really key, of course, as climate activist Emilia Reyes pointed out in a recent interview. With the current measures for a just and equitable transition, if we don't include a gender perspective, we will see that those sectors with a greater male composition will be the ones that will receive all the investment, reproducing existing inequality gaps. Essentially reflecting the fact that if we don't take into account pre-existing societal injustices into our response to climate change, then these injustices will become enhanced. I would also like to point to the recently published article or report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which states that gender and climate justice will be achieved when the root causes of global and structural issues are addressed, challenging unethical and unacceptable use of power for the benefit of the powerful and elites. At the same time, one of the report's key messages is that there are very few examples of successful integration of gender and other social inequities in climate policies to address climate change vulnerabilities and questions of social justice. Now, as a result of this lack of recognition, people are organizing. People are organizing to demand gender and climate justice in many regions across the world. And in this vein, we would now like to show you one of those forms of local resistance. I hope the video works.
Yo soy Antonella Calle del colectivo Yas Unidos. Yas Unidos nacemos en el 2013 a partir de que Rafael Correa decide cancelar la iniciativa Yasuní TT. La iniciativa Yasuní TT lo que planteaba es dejar el crudo del Yasuní en el subsuelo a cambio de una compensación económica por los países que históricamente han contaminado. Desde ahí nace la iniciativa de recoger firmas para ir a una consulta popular que el pueblo ecuatoriano decida sobre si explotar o no. Se recogieron todas las firmas que eran necesarias, pero fueron puestas como si fueran falsas, no válidas, y así se descalificaron más del 60%, violando los derechos de participación de 757,000 personas que firmaron a favor de una consulta. Tenemos las firmas necesarias y también más del 1 por 1000, ¿no?, de las firmas. Si en verdad se quiere combatir el cambio climático, hay que replantearse el modelo extractivo. El foco de discusión preocupación no está ahí porque hay intereses económicos y se caen estos discursos muy superficiales de salve el planeta, usa una funda de tela, ¿no? El cambio climático / extractivismo con el patriarcado van mucho de la mano. Los dos sistemas plantean o buscan beneficiar a unos pocos a costa de la vida, básicamente, en resumen, de otros seres vivos. Creo que es algo urgente que siempre esta lucha por el cambio climático vaya de la mano del feminismo. Es pensar la vida desde una manera mucho más horizontal. Estamos luchando por unos territorios, por el agua, por la vida y cosas así, pero no estamos luchando de la mano con nuestras compañeras que también están exigiendo autonomía de sus cuerpos, de sus vidas, que no les toquen, que no les violen, que no les maten, cosas muy básicas como exigimos con el tema de la naturaleza. Si no nos pensamos interseccionalmente en los espacios, si no pensamos que en donde está la lucha contra el cambio climático tiene que estar el feminismo, no podemos seguir caminando o luchando juntos, porque no vamos a aceptar más espacios sin nosotras.
So after that visual impression of what local forms of resistance could look like, I'd like to get to the aims of this whole event, which are twofold. Okay, so firstly, we would like to draw attention basically to the importance of achieving gender justice and why it is so closely linked to questions of the just transition. But also, we'd really like to hear from local examples from our panelists today of how gender and climate justice and injustices manifest themselves locally, and how this in turn shapes the societal response. So the way we're going to try and do this is by me introducing each panelist very briefly, and then for each panelist to sketch out a bit about their background and their interactions with the topic of today's session. And then we're then going to enter into a discussion with a number of questions which have been prepared, which will be posed to them. And you, the participants, will of course have the opportunity to pose questions as well. The way we thought we'd do this would be through the chat function. So please don't be shy. Question away. There might be some things which have gone too fast, which might not be completely clear, or some unrelated questions you might have. Please do feel free to use the chat function, and these will be collected and fed to me so that I can ask the panelists. So without further ado, I'll very briefly introduce our panelists. Joining us today is Melissa Moreano. Melissa is a feminist climate activist associated with the Critical Geography Collective of Ecuador, working closely with communities resisting oil and minerals extraction. She also teaches about the political ecology of the REDD+ mechanism and territorial planning in the context of climate change at the Simón Bolívar University in Ecuador. Melissa, thank you very much for joining us. Alongside Melissa is Dunya Krause. Dunya is a research officer at the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, UNRISD, leading their work on just transition and transformative adaptation. Dunya is a highly experienced researcher, having worked on a wide range of climate and gender-related issues, specifically environmental justice, climate change adaptation, and the just transition. Thank you very much for making it, Dunya. Alongside Dunya is Ndivile Mokoena. Ndivile is a project coordinator at Gender CC, Women for Climate Justice in South Africa. She works closely with small-scale subsistence farming and women farmers, carrying out training courses on permaculture and agroecology, as well as assessing and monitoring climate change adaptation and mitigation policies from a gender perspective. The fourth panelist hasn't made it yet, but we hope she will make it, so I'm going to introduce her anyway, which is Lucy Mullenke. Lucy has a background in environmental journalism and has recently worked with numerous grassroots organizations dealing with climate change and indigenous rights. Lucy co-founded the Indigenous Women Biodiversity Network and is a member of the International Forum on Biodiversity, as well as the International Forum of Indigenous Women. Hopefully Lucy will make it at some point. It will be great. We'll just have to wait and see. But to the three panelists joining us, thank you so much for taking the time. And I really hope this event will be good. Just very briefly, I'm David Williams. I work in the International Climate Justice Program of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, based currently out of the New York office. I am a white male, blue eyes, short brown hair, bit of a beard. I have a black t-shirt on and a sort of a brown jacket with purple stripes going vertically down. I'm going to try and facilitate the discussion today, and I'm going to do my best. I would now ask Melissa to give her input. Each input will take around sort of 5 minutes, and then we'll get going with the discussion. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, David.
Thank you so much, David. Good morning. We're here. It's morning from where I am to all of you here. Melissa, my name is Melissa. I'm 43. I'm a heterosexual woman with long, straight hair. I'm wearing a black sweater. I live in Quito, in the capital of Ecuador in South America. Part of the Critical Collective. We've been working with communities for 16 years in the Ecuadorian Amazonian. We've been fighting pollution and the destruction of the social weaving that has caused the destruction of oil based on the fossil fuel. And this collective that you saw in the video with Actanela Calle, the purpose was to stop the extraction in the, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go slow, a little bit slower. We have participated on the fight in the ecology movement in Ecuador to stop the oil industries, to demand climate justice, to leave those fossil fuels on the ground. But for years, we've been supporting communities that are fighting the extraction of minerals and connected to, it's been influenced by the mandate that have gone into effect of decarbonation. We have found how the fossil fuel violence has really impacted the men and women, and also the connection with gender violence and the care jobs of these communities. Domestic work increases a lot when there's an industry extractive industry that arrives in the communities, in these communities. It has a height at the moment that there's women trafficking and violence performed against the bodies of women. And as a professor and researcher at an Andean University, we have investigated the red mask, how the gender difference inequalities become deeper when these projects arrive in the communities. We are saying that the just transition of energy and the forest carbon emission are only making these situations worse, and our countries are the main providers of these resources, minerals. We are also providing the carbon scheme. It doesn't work it has been demonstrated doesn't work to change and deepens the gender inequalities that exist in our territories. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for that input. I would now pass the floor to Dunya, please.
Thank you very much, David. Welcome and good afternoon from Geneva, Switzerland. I am Dunya. I'm a woman in my late 30s with long brown hair and horn-rimmed glasses. And today I'm wearing a somewhat orange cardigan and shirt with a flower pattern. At Unrest, as David already introduced, I lead the work that we do on environmental and climate justice, where we also host the Just Transition Research Collaborative that brings together experts from academia and civil society to collectively map and analyze just transition, which we just very broadly define as the idea that justice and equity must form an integral part of the transition towards a low carbon world. And so we're looking at how this concept is being understood and used by different people and groups. And we looked at a lot of different examples and case studies and debates and found actually that there are really, really many different ways of using just transition, from approaches that seek to really preserve the existing political economy while switching to green jobs, then the majority of approaches that aim for different degrees of reform in order to rectify some injustices while transitioning to low carbon development, for example, in terms of being more inclusive in decision-making processes, as well as looking at access to jobs and who actually gets just transition measures. And then there are the more radical approaches, often led by civil society organizations or groups that aim for much more transformative system kind of change, because it sees the root causes of both the climate crisis and social and gender injustices in the overall political economy. And it's important for us in this group to acknowledge that just transition is a grounded concept that originated in the labor movement and eventually made its way into climate activism and policy arenas, because this allows us to understand some of the built-in tensions that reflect the history and evolution of this concept. We think this is quite important when we talk about gender justice in particular, and gender just transition, because the different approaches have different justice implications. So if you think of the most prominent just transition discussions, they focus on workers in the fossil fuel sectors, and that comes with some built-in gender inequality because we're dealing with traditionally male-dominated sectors. So the unions and the people who are fighting for justice are also more male. And then, of course, broader issues of the focus on formal organized labor compared to the vast shares of informal or unpaid types of work that we still see in many parts of the world. So our entry point to this discussion is really this recognition that gender considerations are not yet sufficiently prominent in just transition debates, and that we need we need more work actually on bringing together these different strands of expertise and really discuss how this can all come together in policy making in order to overcome really some of the root causes that create these injustices in the first place.
Thank you very much for that, Dunya. And I would now like to pass on to Ndivile, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me to this space. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening. My name is Ndivile Mokoena, and I am a project coordinator with Gender CCSA based in South Africa. I am an African feminist, a mother of two, and a grandmother to one. My African feminism is expressed by the duke or the headgear that I am wearing right now. And just taking you through my background, the background of my work. Currently, we're working on a new project that is focusing on community-led just transition, precisely because the current discussions and dialogues, the frameworks that are taking place in the country are only focusing on energy transition, which there's nothing wrong with it, and also the working environment. However, community struggles, community needs, community desires and aspiration of a just transition are not being taken into consideration. The social issues, the intersectionalities that are involved in the just transition, the formal sector, circular economy, all those issues are not being taken into consideration. So our scope of work entails advocacy for climate and justice and gender justice in overall. And we're also reviewing climate change policy documents from a gender perspective and advocating for the integration of gender into climate action. We conduct capacity building workshops and trainings on the nexus of gender and climate change for communities and also for government officials. So given that experience of our work, we feel that gender has to play a major role when it comes to just transition, and also a community-driven just transition has to be part of the whole process. We are working with communities, local communities, women's groups, to be specific on the community-driven just transition, connecting different struggles and standpoints, seeking to break down the boundaries between different disciplines, connecting different struggles and different sectors on climate change, socio-economic issues, and women's rights to identify the power dynamics in climate and just transition policies and intervention with an intersectional gender lens. Since energy, agriculture, and waste management sectors are highly male-dominated industries, stakeholders, communities, and civil society organizations working on these sectors need to address this. And we plan to organize learning labs on gender just and just transition. We also plan to engage a variety of advocacy spaces at the local level to raise communities' capacity to address climate change, build resilience, and just transition solutions through human rights and gender lens. And in supporting the community-led solutions, we will focus on women-led and community-owned solutions to address the challenges posed by the transition to renewable energy, regenerative farming, circular economy, including the development of skills and training, inclusive finances, and equitable distribution of sustainable energy. We also need to adopt a gender transformative approach to contribute to the transformation of gender, social norms, and structures by harnessing the potential of a just transition to advance gender equality and realize women's rights, and enhance gender equitable behavior by providing the necessary tools and training to women community members and identifying and addressing the fundamental causes and sources of gender inequality, such as the gender differentiated impacts of climate change and care work. And finally, we will be undertaking a research on disadvantaged communities, energy poverty, and the just transition process. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndivile, and thank you all for those great inputs. And we are going to start off the discussion now. We're going to start off with a question in which it would be great if each panelist could respond, which is a two-part question, essentially to get us going. What do we actually mean when we say no climate justice without gender justice? And why is it so important to take a feminist approach to just transitions? I would ask Melissa to start, and then we can continue with the other two.
Gracias, David, y gracias a
Thank you,
Ndivile
David,
por esas primeras
Ndivile,
palabras.
for your words. What do we want to mean when we say there can be no climate justice without feminist justice? We want to broaden that adjective of just in the way that it protects the energy position jobs, and also that we're proposing new jobs with the new type of alternative energy. And we know that it can generate, but it can also hurt others. But from a feminist perspective, we know that a lot of jobs that we want to protect are white, male, stable jobs, full employment, what we will call. We know that there's labor force, and in countries it's racialized, legalized because it's immigrant, unstable, and temporal. What's happening with these jobs? Why don't we search, protect these other jobs or generate jobs for these people that have vulnerable jobs? And also, it doesn't take into account care work that is done in all over most of the world by women. And what I was saying online in how to understand a just transition is not only to change the energy, it's how it's been taught in the US and Europe without looking at the extraction part. The materials are being extracted. If we don't focus on that, it's not going to be a feminist transition, nor just. It has to take it into account to minimize the inequalities in those countries that are providing the resources and the environments, but in particular with the metals, it's creating even more inequality in our countries. The just transitions in Europe, and in Europe, it's also not taking into account the Indigenous, the Black communities where minerals are taken the same as the way fossil fuels are extracted. They're not thinking about mix. The only thing that we have said, we don't want the extraction that also supports a transition in another area of the world. It's not Nash. If we don't stop that, it's never going to be just. No matter how if we add that just adjective, it's not. If we don't take all those ideas into account, it's never going to be just. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for sort of setting the stage for the challenge that is before us. I would pass on to Dunya, please.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, Melissa. I think I would second pretty much everything you've just said, because for me, I mean, personally, this means that we need to recognize that the world and the systems that we currently live in are systems and a world of great injustice with regard to gender, but of course there are a lot of other intersecting dimensions, and those are related to power relations and essentially the struggle between different groups. And I think if we cannot overcome this kind of logic that tries to divide people into different groups, and that tries to overcome some of these issues in order to achieve justice for all, we just cannot claim that we've achieved climate justice. It's essentially the slogan, no justice for some is justice for none. We need to really make sure that we achieve something that works for everybody. And I think it's really important to take a feminist approach to just transition in particular, because that allows us to point out that some of the approaches that are currently being labeled as just transition are not actually good enough to achieve justice, and therefore shouldn't be called just transitions, because we need to really look at the processes and the quality of change that we're pursuing in order to make it work for everybody and to achieve greater equality.
Thank you very much, Nia. I would also pass the floor to Ndivile, please.
Thank you, David. I agree 100% with Duja and Mel. Gender equality is recognized as a fundamental human right. It is a powerful driver for growth and social justice, and a requirement for achieving sustainable development. Within the climate change arena, it is fundamental to combat climate change effectively. And besides gender equality being a fundamental human right, it is also a means for shaping effective interventions that are practical and based on principles of social justice, dignity, and respect for the worth of men, women, boys, and girls, all of whom are important actors in formulating effective climate change interventions. The tendency to ignore women and girls' perspective means losing out on ideas, visions, and potential effective climate change interventions that are gender sensitive and responsive. In turn, this weakens democracy, undermines women and girls' rights, and limits their option to become agents of change. Research has also proven that owing to fundamental gender differences and inequalities that are deeply rooted in socio-cultural norms, religious and political rights, and institutionalized rules, climate change presents gender differentiated impacts, vulnerabilities, and responses. Gender equality, for an example, limits equal access to social and economic capital, productive resources, livelihood, diversification, strategies, information, health services, education, skills, and technology, all of which are vital in shaping and determining men's and women's ability to respond to climate change. The debate on gender equality is already a complex and sensitive issue in traditional African societies. The debate on climate change is also inherently complex. Introducing gender equality into the debate on climate change is easily mistaken for cultural interference, leading to misunderstandings about what constitutes gender equality. Calling for gender equality in combating climate change, for an example, is often mistaken for supporting only women. There is a need to correct this narrative. Better integration of gender equality in combating climate change requires considering various gender aspects. For an example, issues of power, I think Dunja and Mel has mentioned that, and participation in policy and decision-making processes. This encompasses the proportion of women and men in decision-making positions, research, negotiations, and equal representation in shaping climate change debates and solutions. There is also a need to consider gender-related aspects of climate change, such as the impact on women, men, boys, and girls. There are different contributions and perceptions of climate change and the solutions they prefer for mitigation and adaptation. To assess these aspects, a gender analysis must be undertaken in a gender mainstreaming process. Hence the slogan that there is no climate justice without gender justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndivile. I really like what you said about changing the narrative of that it's only women who can benefit from a just transition or a feminist just transition. But I think it's really important to talk more about the gains throughout wider society and throughout all social groups. So thank you very much. Now, before I get on to the next question, I would like to introduce Faith into the discussion, Faith Nataya, from the Indigenous Information Network. Faith, I hope you can hear us okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Faith. Great that you could join us, and great to have you with us. Would you maybe like to have the floor for a few minutes to briefly introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Faith Nataya, and I'm from the Indigenous peoples of the Maasai community in Kenya. And I work with Indigenous Information Network. And as I said, I work at a community center called Olorukoti Resource and Knowledge Center, where I'm posted. And we work with Indigenous women and Indigenous girls on different issues, dealing with different issues, as I have said, on climate change, on cultural practices, restoration, and so much more. So yeah, that's basically what we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. It's great that you could make it on such short notice. So thank you very much. I'll get on to my next question. And a couple of you have touched on it already, but I'd just like to go into it a bit more because I think it's quite a crucial area. And which is why is it actually so crucial to adequately reflect care work in the labor markets for a truly feminist just transition, and you maybe have some ideas on how this could be achieved. I would start with Dunya on this one, if that's okay.
That is okay, although I have to point out that I'm clearly not the expert on care work. If you look at UNREST, we have a long legacy of working on care and unpaid care work and really pushing it to be picked up by the SDGs and so on. So I'm not sure I can do it justice, but I think in my just basic understanding, I think on the one hand, the fact that care work currently isn't adequately reflected illustrates already a range of quite deep-seated gender inequalities that at the end of the day leave women disadvantaged in many domains. And there's several reasons why, in my opinion, this needs to change for a feminist just transition. So first of all, on a very practical level, women are still disproportionately responsible for care work and carry the main burden. So it's hard to imagine how a truly feminist just transition could come about without looking at care, since it makes up quite a big part of our lives. And then just transition is also a way to strengthen workers' voice and agencies and ensuring fair processes of burden sharing. So if we limit it to the domain that are currently reflected and represented in labor markets, we will, of course, reproduce gender inequalities. So again, it's hard to imagine how we could ever come towards a gender egalitarian feminist approach without being specific about care work and somehow accounting for it. But also, I think on a broader level, if we're really aiming to drastically reduce global emissions and environmental destructions, we need to get rid of what was called by a couple of researchers affluent overconsumption. So essentially, all of the types of consumption that we, especially in the global north, but also richer people in developing countries, are doing that really doesn't serve humanity in any kind of meaningful way and just contributes to environmental degradation and climate crisis. So this will be things like overly large homes, oversized vehicles, wasteful food, fast fashion, and all of that. And if we want to tackle all of that, that will automatically bring about very big changes in labor markets and require us to really have a fundamental discussion about how we value different kinds of work and reorganize our economies in order to really serve our societies and the planet better.
Thank you very much, Dunya. Considering you're apparently not an expert on this, I think this was quite an informed response. I particularly like your point about the affluent overconsumption of high-income regions. Looking out the window of New York, I can see quite a lot of unnecessary overconsumption. Ndivile, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dunja, for that input. I feel, care is at the core of a feminist. Care work and just caring is at the core of a feminist. Regenerative economy that honors human rights, meets needs of all people, and enables us to live in the right relationships with nature. That is a part of the care work. To build a feminist regenerative economy, care in all its forms, whether paid or unpaid, formal or informal, must be valued and respected. Unfortunately, care work, including the work of nurturing children and caring for the sick or the elderly community members, and of maintaining bodies, relationships, families, communities, and the environment, is undervalued in our current economic system and is disproportionately assigned to women. Recognizing the value of its, which has the regeneration of human life and society, rather than the production of goods for sale as its main goal, is an important touchstone for broader discussions for decent livelihoods. It is important to realize that patriarchal value systems, which have historically considered this kind of work less valuable than productive work, are part of the current system of oppression and have played a role in laying the groundwork for the current crisis that we are facing today. Achieving a feminist just transition will require skills training for women in climate resilient jobs, including food and water security, to transition to a carbon-free environment. Securing clean air and water, climate and community resilience, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment for all. That is considering care work, which is predominantly responsibility for women. So taking in consideration all those issues is including care work in the just transition. The elimination of legal barriers to women, including widows, concerning land ownership, resources, and inheritance, to reduce the economic impact of climate change on girls and women who suffer most from food and water insecurity. Deliberate strategies, public policies, and consciously made social and behavioral changes are essential for a well-planned, economically viable, and socially acceptable transition. I will stop there. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Ndivile, for those strong words. I think the sentiments are echoed not only by us, but it seems by our participants as well. I'm always amazed that it took something like a pandemic to very briefly acknowledge the work that is done by those who aren't sufficiently paid for this, and it seems that that has decreased now again. So so it's clear that this will be a big issue in the climate change debate as well. I will come on to my next question, which is how can these coping mechanisms, which have been developed by people who work and aren't sufficiently paid for this, how can these coping mechanisms developed by these women in different sectors influence the just transition debates? And I would ask Melissa, please, to respond to this one.
Gracias, David.
Thank you, David. That was the most difficult question for me to think about, because you can look at it from the perspective of women and care work and sustaining life. They're the middle, could be in the middle of a just transition that is desirable, but it's also giving them more work and more responsibility for women. So yeah, regardless in the way this context of climate change, that and the role that women do when there's a respondent to climate disasters, I think it's important to visualize when there's lack of a response, when there isn't a just transition, the way that we've been talking about so far, it's really the women that have to uphold the families, the communities on the face of a climate disaster. And like I mentioned before, that care work of emotional support, especially, but the whole care work of families, of communities that has been feminized so much. We have to think in the feminist spaces, there's two things, has to be recognized by a salary, that the state can take that job and then with the fear that it could become more feminized or could land on more vulnerable women or migrant a lot of times at that risk. And then the other is that society has to take this on through privatization, for example, education, community luncheons, of childcare, preschooler childcare. And so it's the state that would assume through salaries, through these type of programs, social programs. Instead of that, we argue that the community should take them on, but we need healthy communities. And so moving away, that the women emotionally support society and families. How do we socialize that work? The question is, how do we socialize so it doesn't land on the women? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Particularly as well for also showing some of the dangers that come with an inadequate approach when you don't think of the consequences of some measures that the state can take. So thank you very much. Faith, I realize that you haven't had much time to prepare for these questions, but would you maybe have something to add on this point?
Yes. Working with the different Indigenous women in my community has shown how women do have power, and they have come up with different ways of doing things that has been really amazing, considering there have been so many changes, especially when it comes to climate change issues and other crises. Knowing that they have gone through different challenges and have this gender specific barriers that has limited their ability to cope and come up with ways to live through all this. But we've seen them work very hard, trying to provide for their families, trying to take care of the animals. And in all this, we have seen how this has changed how different people, different stakeholders view women and what they are able to do. And it has given them an upper hand to being understood by different stakeholders, especially the men in our communities who have always discriminated the women, who have always looked down on the women, and they've always been seen as children and unable to do anything and even make decisions on their own. But seeing them coping and coming up with mechanisms to live and to ensure that they're able to provide for their families and everyone that depend on them has actually changed and has informed how we see them, how the community sees them, and they're able to be being trusted more. So it has changed the debates on gender justice and in among our people, which is something that we want to encourage more, considering our women are very knowledgeable. And it's amazing how after all this, they're able to retain all the knowledge to keep pushing on the resilience they've shown through all this. It's really amazing, and it will change. And I believe that that there's a long way to go, which is something that they will be able to work with them through all this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith, and thank you very much for giving that that perspective, that local perspective, and how just transitions, how feminist just transitions are manifest on the ground, and how people are dealing with that. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much. I have two more questions which I will pose to all panelists, and then we can open up the floor to some questions from our participants. So just a reminder, feel free to use the chat function for anything, for any questions you might have, or anything which is still a bit unclear. my question now is essentially how do we actually know once a feminist just transition has been achieved? Now I know that's a very abstract question, but I thought it might be interesting to get your opinions on this. What are the criteria? When do we realize when we don't need to fight for this anymore? I'll begin with Dunya, and then we can pass on.
I was going to say we will tweet about it, but most likely you will hear from us. But joke aside, I think, as Faith just said, we are, it's pretty much work in progress. We're still quite far from achieving any kind of just transition, I think, let alone a feminist one, because we are talking about a process that in most cases has been launched relatively recently and is also trying to fight against structures and systems that have been in place for a really long time. And yeah, as we mentioned already, there are some power dynamics to really fight against, which are not necessarily in our favor. But I think the question you're asking is really important and merits some further research, actually, because it really depends, I think, on how you define the goals of a feminist just transition, who you ask, whether they have been sufficiently achieved. And at the moment, we don't have a straightforward tool or method that would allow us to judge the quality of a just transition and consider different viewpoints as well as different baselines or starting points and an agreed upon endpoint. Because I think that's one of the really tricky, difficult questions with justice, is that it's not really a clear-cut, easily defined concept which would allow you to make a check mark and say, okay, now justice is achieved. This is sufficiently, what is sufficiently just? No, will never be. Living in a very complex society will never achieve 100% equality where everybody has access to the same things or owns the same stuff. So that's not possible. So I think we need to really have quite in-depth discussions and debates about how just does it need to be before we allow people to call it just transition or climate justice.
Thank you very much, Dunya. Ndivile, perhaps you could give us your thoughts on this.
Thank you. I agree with you, Dunja. We will tweet once we have achieved the just transition that we want to see. I think this is more on what we would want to see as women, as feminists, and as local communities and people who marginalized, disadvantaged communities. What is it that they want to see in this just transition? And I think a feminist just transition will prioritize the poor, women, children, and most vulnerable members of our society. It will eradicate wage and skills gap and establish inclusive social dialogues. Working conditions will be improved, especially for women. Care workers will be considered a huge contribution to the economy since it has fewer carbon footprints. A feminist just transition will enhance social protection and will be an anti-racist framework. It will involve rethinking our relationship to non-human life and to each other, and consider an economy structured around redistribution of land and wealth, restoration and regeneration of territories, and people's and women's rights and dignity should be at the forefront. It will be about democracy, accountability, and increasing the resilience of poor to climate impacts through access to safe, clean, affordable energy and food sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Ndivile. Faith, would you have some thoughts on this question?
Yes, to achieve all this is really going to take a while, and I agree with the speakers before me. And there is a lot of changes that we want to see happening in our communities. especially for women, as we have said, they've been marginalized for a very long time. They have so many challenges which are like gender differentiated, and it's going to take a while to ensure that they have equal access to everything that they need, especially for communities like ours, finding equal access to land, high literacy levels for women, ensuring that their children are going to school, ensuring that they are able to have equal access for different resources. All this is going to really take a very long time, and especially since the fight has been going on for a very long time, achieving gender justice is like also going to be a long fight, and before we get there, it's going to take some time. And so we look forward to when everyone, and especially women, are able to access all this on an equal base, considering the changes that we want to see in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith, and Melissa. It would be great to hear your thoughts as well.
Gracias.
Thank
Coincido.
you. I agree. That is a difficult question. And I think what we can say now, what we would like, how would that look like? How would a just feminist transition look like? I think we can start with the north, with the global north can decrease some level consumption and use their own resources and stop that overwhelming extraction of the south to the north. And also, like Antonella was mentioning on the video at the beginning, that climate fight, it takes on the fight of the women of the yarn. It's part of it, because like colleagues are, if they're not, if we don't fight for gender equality, it's hard to fight for justice, climate justice. In Latin America in particular, I think it's crucial. It's crucial to get rid of every violence against women where we have such a high number, and that includes the legalization of abortion that impacts them so much. And this care that has been mentioned of nature, I think that is something important. How the communities, especially how the women, take care of Mother Earth.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you as well for bringing in the high income versus low income aspect as well, the global north and global south, and the colonial aspect, which I think is really important on this. And I also fully acknowledge it's a very difficult question. It totally depends on who you ask, on where you are, on when. I mean, it's also like, just because at one certain point in time, certain criteria, maybe they may be different in a different point in time. So I just thought it was really interesting to get your perspectives on what you thought, where we were heading, and what your goals were. And I had some great criteria for utopia coming. I have one final question before I will ask some questions from our participants. And this final question is, what gives you hope? I think this is a nice question to have after the previous question. So what gives you hope, and where do you draw your inspiration? And this time we'll start with Melissa, if that's okay.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Para mí fue sumamente interesante.
For me, it was very interesting.
Ay, perdón, es que le prendo el.
I'm sorry. I switched to the English. It was very interesting at the last call to meet the people at Glasgow, the inhabitants of different cities that cannot pay for energy because it's too high during the winter, and all the problems, the urban problems in the global aspect of being excluded from this basic service of having energy during the winter. And so that's an aspect that gives me a lot of hope, that I feel that gives us a path to the light, to that connection that of different workers, of city dwellers, people that are living to the limits, that are not being able to afford their basic services. And then all the people from the South are fighting the extraction of fossil fuels, of minerals, that connection that can be done to get solutions and push for alternatives from the bottom without having to have to rely on the UN or organizations without intermediaries, but also finding solution, also questioning, analyzing, and on all of these solutions that are being proposed, like alternatives to climate change and solutions and with low carbon emission, and so that it's not just some green cleaning, but the real financing to improve the communities. I think the key, what I've been calling, has been calling a lot before, international solidarity between people united and not in benefit of the great companies in the big industries. And that's what gives me hope.
Very much for those strong words, Melissa. Faith, would you have something to add on this?
Yes, what has been very important to us is mostly our communities, those that we work with, the youth, the elders, children, women, who as of now are like over 1,000 combined, and they have worked together collectively, ensuring that there's a lot of intergenerational learning among the women and the youth, the elders and the youth, and including their children in the different activities in which we train them on. They have integrated each other's roles together in ensuring that they are able to achieve their goals collectively as a community. And that has been really inspiring for us to see that whatever they are being taught, whatever they're being taken through, they're able to put to action, they're able to retain all this knowledge, and it's really amazing. It keeps you like going back to them every time. I remember the first time when I did go for my first field visit, I was like asking everyone, what is it that you people saw here? You know, very remote places where there's no infrastructure, very bad roads, and we will still go there because seeing how the community is responding and trying to change the world, making it a better place for themselves, has been really amazing. And it keeps us going back to these communities to see where they've reached, how they're going on with everything. And the feedback that we get from them is even over the top, because we could see how much impact what they have been able to learn has brought in their lives. And there are so many changes that we've seen ever since we like started working with them, and the strength and resilience they've shown through all this is very encouraging. And we like keep going, keep working with them, keep encouraging them to continue to do these changes to make sure that they're able to be comfortable in their day-to-day lives, and trying to put aside all the challenges, put aside all the negativity, and try to do best what they can do. So that's what we work towards.
Thank you again, Faith, for the local perspective on that. It's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear where you draw hope from in working with local communities. Thank you very much. Ndivile, I would hand over to you.
I think dialogues and discussions that, as we are having now, that are taking place around the world on the subject of just transition, they really give me hope that as we talk and we raise these issues, especially the issues of women and girls, someday, you know, our leaders, our politicians will be able to hear and take action. I think once they hear this all the time they hear this discussion talking about the integration of gender and women and children's rights, it will make sense, or it will, you know, change a mindset someday. And also for me, I think what gives me hope is the involvement of community organizations in these discussions, because it's important that they are not left behind. Sometimes we use this slogan without really putting them into practice to say this transition it doesn't have to leave anyone behind, but in most instances, the people who are disadvantaged, the poor, who feel the impact most, are left behind. So their efforts to drive a community-led just transition just gives me an inspiration. And hopefully this will be the beginning of regular social dialogues around climate change and gender issues towards a sustainable development and low carbon economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I'm sure these inspirations will go on to inspire other people by you sharing them with us. So thank you very much. Dunya, please.
Yeah, thank you, David. I don't think I have a whole lot of new things to add to this list. I think I wanted to admit that actually there are quite a few moments in my days where I don't feel very inspired or hopeful, because I read the news and things like IPCC reports that just keep getting worse and worse. And then, just as Ndivile said, it's conversations like this one that kind of reinstill me with hope, because we can really see that no matter where we are from or where we are based, what we work on, we share certain concerns and we share a lot of the values that we are fighting for. And I think these kind of connections and building these alliances in order to try to tackle some of these really daunting, big crises that we're facing, I think that it's this kind of commonality and this sharing of experiences and ideas with people from around the world that I find really inspiring and hopeful.
Thank you very much, Dunya. It is also one of the reasons why this question, I think, was chosen, because sometimes the fight for this can seem daunting, and the stacks are against the people trying to do this. But it's really important that we support each other. And that we draw inspiration from each other on this. And that's why these kind of platforms can be really good for doing that. Now, I personally have many more questions, but we have a quarter of an hour left. So I think it would be a good time to take some questions from the floor. And I would start off with, what qualities do you see women need to grow in themselves to achieve justice and equality in climate change? I would just open the floor and let you decide if someone feels like they can contribute on this question.
From my experience, I think because women has been left outside of information, knowledge, discussion, you know, their role or their place was just in the kitchen, considering or doing care work. People will discuss about water, about food security, energy issues, and leave women behind. So they were, what's the word? They were disadvantaged on getting the necessary information and knowledge on what is happening around them with issues that affect them directly. So I think giving them skills, educating them, giving them information on what is happening around them with water issues, with food security, with energy, they will be able to stand up and raise their issues, and also table their needs and come up with solutions, because they do have solutions. Once they have that knowledge and information, they will be able to be empowered and be able to stand up for their rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndivile. Does anyone else have something to add? Yes, Dunya?
Maybe just as not very informed or anything, just a reflection of listening to Ndivile and the question, I was thinking maybe it's also an issue of which qualities we have to get rid of and which kind of behaviors we need to unlearn in order to achieve justice. And I think just as an just personal observation, I think we still live in a world where a lot of women are very much inclined to put the kind of well-being of the group or the well-being of others above of our own. So I feel like it's a matter of unlearning some of those things and really expressing when we're fed up and expressing when something is not okay in order to kind of really demand justice.
Yes, be angrier, I think. Then on to the next question, if there are no more other contributions on this one, is a really difficult one, which is, are there any risks in stretching the concept of just transition too wide to achieve climate justice? And if we do stretch it this wide, how can we make sure not to lose the worker in hyphenated comment, the worker movement?
Maybe I can start with a fairly generic answer. I think, yes, thank you, Pat, for the question. There's definitely a risk, because this is something that comes up quite a lot when we discuss with people from the Just Transition Research Collaborative. And there's even within the group of researchers and people who are working on just transition, there's very different views on how far it should go as a concept, because there is the risk of, if we're trying to put everything under this concept, then at one point it becomes meaningless, because it's supposed to do everything, and that's just not possible. So I think it's important to maintain a certain logic and meaning in it, but then as long, I think, in my personal opinion, as long as we are focusing on a transition away from fossils, there needs to be this kind of transition for the climate, right? So there needs to be some kind of transition happening. Within that, there's still a lot of scope to make sure that we're being inclusive, and to make sure that we're not adopting a framework that is so narrow that we're creating problem for other people or other regions because we are too exclusive. So I think it's still a bit of an ongoing battle, I guess, but there's definitely risks related to how far you want to go.
Thank you very much, Dunya.
I think I'll jump in there quickly, just to add on what Dunya said. It's true, there is huge risk in this concept, and a just transition is a big elephant in the room, which cannot just be tackled at a go. And we need to have a small bite at a time. I don't see any harm, in my opinion, in putting all these concepts together on what a just transition will look like, or a gender just transition will look like. However, we need to prioritize issues. Which issues are of priority to meet our goals? And whatever issue we tackle at a time, we need to make sure that all the intersectionalities around it are also absorbed and integrated into the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndivile, for also referring to the intersectional approach, which is really necessary. And I think Melissa wants to come in. Sorry, Melissa.
Sí,
No,
sí, solo algo cortito.
just a brief that I understand it and that I think is very important to have side by side have the workers' movement with justice, with climate justice, in the way that we have to strategize so that it could be an alliance in the worker movements, that we have to bring these issues. I repeat, I insist that the energy transition in Europe and the US cannot be done on the back of the extraction of the farmers of the South, and that has to be at the forefront of the workers of the North.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for bringing in that colonial aspect in as well. I have one final question, which we can take. Unfortunately, there are many questions now flooding in. I think we only really have time for one final question. And I'm going to take the one from Valerie. I think Ndivile in her talk mentioned a bit about the relationship between women and nature. So going on from this, what Valerie says is that she's interested in the connection which is made of women caring for people and caring for nature. And could you please elaborate on the notion of women caring for nature?
Women are carers by nature, and they take care of every human life, and they take care of every life, you know, that is connected to nature, you know. Women farmers are proven to be the best because they can connect better to nature. They understand nature, they can communicate better to nature, especially when we use in traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge in taking care of the nature, yes, because it needs that tender care. It doesn't need pesticides, chemicals, you know, for it to be able to be productive. So women understand better that nature needs that tender care. It needs natural caring for it, not chemicals, not unnatural uses to be able to push it to be productive. So yeah, I'll just give that a little bit. It's a huge subject of caring for nature and human life. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've definitely responded to it. So so I hope the person who asked the question is satisfied. I think we do actually have time for one more question. And there's a question which is specifically addressed to Faith here, which is, what do you think a just transition means for young Indigenous feminists?
So we're looking into like having gender equality in different aspects of our lives, and for a very long time we have felt like the youth have been left behind in different issues, participation and all. So having a just transition and fighting for this as a youth is very important for us to have these spaces, you know, ensuring that we retain this for ourselves and the generation to come after us. And having this interconnectedness is very important, so that, you know, things that usually, like when the youth have been given the power, the space to do stuff, things usually like take a very big turn towards the positive, and having the youth take part in just transition is very important, especially for the females, impacting different perspectives, different energies, bringing all that to the space is very, very, very important. So this is good.
Thank you very much, Faith, for bringing in that really valuable perspective again. Now, we are rapidly nearing the end of this event. And to finish off with, I would actually like each participant, or each panelist, should I say rather, to make a sort of a one-sentence demand for this year's Commission on the Status of Women. It's the 66th, I think. So yeah, if each of you could maybe state a demand which you would like to see happen over the next 2 weeks, as today is the first day. I think it's a good day to start with some good demands. I will just take you in the order of how you appear on my screen here. So Dunya, if you could start, please.
Okay, so I think I would love for CSW, on the one hand, to recognize the importance really of debates like ours in social science research to inform policies that can tackle the multiple and intersecting crises we are facing. And then secondly, to really keep just transition in the outcome text.
Thank you very much. Melissa.
Gracias, David.
Thank you, David.
Igual le plantearía al
I would also
CSW66.
The 66 CSW for just transition and ecology. It's only going to be just if it's feminist and internationalist, and also that the demand, the stronger one for climate stage is that the setting of the UN pressures or ask the Latin American countries to take seriously the legalization of abortion and also the erasure of all types of violence against women.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Faith, over to you.
Everyone in this space and communities, they have control over decisions that affect their daily lives. So fighting to prevent and eliminate violence is very important, as well as just transition.
Thank you very much. And Ndivile.
Yes, I would like this high-profile event to advance a just and equitable energy transition, shifting from a fossil fuel-based economy to a low-carbon and renewable energy system that upholds women's human rights and advances social and environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ndivile, and thank you to my wonderful panel. You've all been really great, and I've learned very much, and will go out of this event with more motivation to do my work. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much to all the participants. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you very much to the translators, who I think have done a wonderful job, who have had to translate a lot of difficult language. So thank you very much to the translators. Thank you so much to the team here at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for organizing all the technical and organizational aspects of it. Thank you very much to the NGO CSW platform. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and let's hope for the best for the next 2 weeks. Thank you very much.